Hey everyone, my name is Shruti. I work on the Chrome strategy team, and I'm here to talk about external contributions to Chromium. So hopefully this goes without saying, but yes, Google is still the majority contributor to Chromium, but we love non-Google contributions to Chromium for so many, many reasons. One, I think we love sharing the joy of working on this massive open source project that touches billions of users and billions of lives, and we love being with all of you in this journey. And also, more importantly, we strongly believe that Chromium and the web are better when there are diverse sets of interests, priorities, and investments into it. So if you're having a little bit of deja vu, I showed this graph at last year's BlinkOn, so these are not the current trends. But this is the snapshot view that I shared. And just an obligatory disclaimer with any kinds of metrics, it is not representative of the value of contributions to Chromium. But we're looking at the trends here. These are the number of commits from each of these organizations, and we were seeing a bit of a downward trend here. Just for accuracy reasons, the dotted blue line is 1% of Google's commits, and all of the other numbers are absolute numbers. And we brought this up to kind of highlight this trend at last BlinkOn and talk as a community to see, is there something we can do better? Is there something that is causing friction if you all want to contribute more to Chromium and are not able to? And I thought it led to so many fantastic conversations, which I'll talk about in a minute. But before that, I want to look at the current trends. What are things looking at right now? Google is omitted from this graph because we still kind of dominate the numbers, and I wanted to take a bit of a closer look. But as you can see, the trend for many of these organizations are on an uptick again. We're seeing the numbers go back up. One of these that I wanted to call out, which is a little bit different from the others, is Igalia. So a lot of Igalia's contributions are funded by multiple different investors. And so the downward trend that you're seeing there was kind of just the general trend in tech around that time. So there were different budgeting decisions by different organizations, which weren't fully within Igalia's control. And so I just wanted to call that. But we're seeing that a lot of the other numbers are going back up nicely, and we kind of love seeing this. So yeah, kudos to all of you. Now, if you're looking at this and saying the visuals from this year look so much better, Shruti's gotten so much better at this. It wasn't me at all. Arthur has this fantastic dashboard, which you all should totally check out. There are tons of filters on it. So if you want to keep track of how your organization is doing with some of this, please take a look. Or if you just like staring at data like me, it's a really cool dashboard, and visuals are great. It's very, very high quality. Totally recommend it. Now, like I mentioned before, commits don't always tell the full story in terms of investments into the project. So just to be sure, let's look at a couple more trends here. This one is about reviews. And you can see this is, again, looking really good. I wanted to call out Microsoft. In the previous trend that we saw with commits, Microsoft is back to their earlier peak. But in this one, they've blown off their earlier peak. So this is looking fantastic. And again, just talking about how there are so many different ways of contributing to an open source project. It's not all about commits, but when you want to build more influence, agency, ownership in a project, things like this are fantastic. More code reviews, more code owners, even things like triaging bugs, fixing bugs. It's not always the shiny work, but all of this shows investment and commitment to the open source project. And this is fantastic to see. I'm really thrilled to see all of this work. Okay, just one more here, again, just to reassure ourselves that all of the trends are trending in the same direction. This one is unique committers. And again, you can see here the numbers, all of the numbers are starting to trend back up. And we're feeling very good about all of this. Speaking of all the different ways in which one may contribute to Chromium, and specifically things around investing in the commons, We've been talking about over the past few years with all of you, especially after the last BlinkOn, about how we can bring in more diverse investment into things like the commons. There were a few ideas that came up. We've been talking about them, and I wanted to talk about one idea in particular today. We floated this idea at last BlinkOn, just as one of many, saying, what if we started a Chromium collective fund? Would that help? It's really hard for organizations to set aside dollars to invest in the commons when they could be doing so many other things with it. As the year goes on, more and more dollars kind of get pulled away into doing other things. And this was an idea that really resonated with so many of you. So a lot of organizations said, that kind of sounds great. There were also vendors, individual contributors, who said this could actually maybe change how the ecosystem works in some positive ways. So let's keep talking. And we have been talking, and we've made a lot of progress on this, and I wanted to provide a concrete update. So I'm really excited to share today with all of you that we have these 4 organizations, Microsoft, Meta, Opera, and Google, committed to starting what we are calling the Collective to Support Chromium. This is a fund that we're planning to host at the Linux Foundation, who has a lot of experience running and managing things like this. They will be hosting funds from contributors, handling, contracting with vendors who are completing these Chromium projects, and taking care of payments when the work is completed. And again, like I said, we have a lot of faith and trust in this organization because they have managed so many other funds like this, and we have experience working with them in the past as well. So you will see formal announcements as well as an official launch before the end of this year. But here is where this idea took root last year at BlinkOn. So I wanted to bring it back to all of you here today, give you a little bit of sneak peek about what things are going to look like, but watch out for the formal announcements that are coming up soon. So the purpose of the collective to support Chromium is to raise budget and spend funds that support and benefit the broader Chromium developer ecosystem. So what does that mean? That's a lot of words, but essentially what we're saying is that we want to work on projects that concretely have evidence in terms of either surveys or research that shows that developers care about this and developers want this. So if I come up to the fund tomorrow and say, I have a secret partner or a secret use case, and can we use funds from this to further that project? It's not going to work. So we're really going to have to make sure that this is something that the Chromium project benefits from. And I have a few examples here that would hopefully help create a mental model of what kinds of projects would go through this, but code health is really a very big part of it. So we're looking at things like code health projects, maybe interop issues where Chromium's lagging from other engines, even things like fixing bugs, creating test suites, all of that kind of stuff that will make Chromium healthier as a project would be things that go through this. So why do we want to do this? I talked about this a little bit, but we're really hoping that organizations can set aside dedicated funds through this initiative to work on projects in the commons. So more proactive investment into the spaces that I think we all care about, but hopefully those don't have to compete with all the other priorities that all of these organizations have. We also believe that, again, Chromium is just going to be better, and the web is going to be better if there are diverse investments into it, diverse priorities. And Google will continue to work on all of the things that are important to us, but this project will be so much better and so much healthier if there's more diversity in the investments. And then this one is maybe a bit of a more ambitious goal, but I hope that an initiative like this can act as a catalyst and really energize the ecosystem. So maybe, there are individual contributors who came up to me after last year's talk and said, I love working on Chromium. It brings me so much joy. It's the favorite part of my week, but I have a day job. Chromium doesn't pay the bills right now. And so it's just a hobby project, work on it on the side. And it would be great for something like this if I could do a little bit more of something that brings me a lot of joy. So there's potentially a lot of skill set within the ecosystem. And unprioritized projects that are just waiting to be done. And if we could somehow reduce the friction in connecting those two, I'm hoping that the ecosystem will be a lot more energized by this. In terms of what changes to expect, I am very excited about this, obviously, but also I want to just call out what all of you should expect. If you're making code changes to Chromium, and you're a contributor to Chromium, the way that you make changes to Chromium does not change. So nothing is going to change around how your code reviews happen, how your code lands, what kinds of processes you need to follow. None of that changes. This collective is just adding one more way for Chromium Commons projects to get funded. So it's essentially a way that funds exchange hands, but in terms of how changes are made to Chromium, no processes are changing, none of the governance models are changing. If you're landing code in Chromium, you will still continue to do it exactly how you're doing it today. And again, at this time for this year, this is still expected to be a very small part of the total of all of the investments into Chromium. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the structure and a few more details about this, and then I'll just open it up for discussion. We expect that we will have two committees, a steering committee, a governing committee. The steering committee is who is going to maintain the project pipeline, have more details around like how big is this project, how complex is it, what kind of skill set does it need, and hopefully also pair them with a mentoring team or someone who has experience with Chromium commits who can help them along the way. The governing committee does a lot of other things like managing the budget, creating other committees if needed. And based on the level of contribution, whether you're an organization or an individual contributor, you get to nominate officials to one or both of these committees. Now, one of the things that we specifically negotiated with the Linux Foundation is we want everybody who wants to participate to have a voice in this. So let's say you kind of don't want to make a huge contribution, you don't care about getting seats on any of these committees, you just want to be a part of it, you can still do that by being part of what is called a supporter program. And you can contribute pretty much anything to it and just be part of the discussion and come help if you're excited about this. Where are we right now? We have an agreement on the terms and conditions, on the structure, and the venue for the fund. The next steps, any other entities who are still interested, we still have a couple of organizations who are considering this. And so if you feel like you want to be involved, this is actually an exciting time. So not all of this is done yet. We're still getting started. So if you want to get involved, please do. This is a fantastic time to do that. We want to work together as a group to iron out the remaining details because, again, we want this to really be a community effort. We want to have more of these initiatives that Chromium owns as a community. And we want to prepare for the launch. So if all of this sounds exciting to you, how do you get involved? I feel like I haven't said the word funds so many times in any 15-minute period of my time. So the first one should be pretty obvious. You can contribute funds to get this initiative started, but there are also so many other ways in which you can contribute. I have a form up here for you if you can think of ideas right now, even before the launch, just to help us get started with like creating a project pipeline. What kinds of projects would you love for this fund to work on? Please submit those ideas on there. We have a working group. You can join the working group. You'll get notified. We're going to start having pretty regular, maybe weekly, bi-weekly meetings, depending on the interest. And again, you don't have to be a member of the fund. If you're interested, join the working group and come join the conversation. This is not going to be an easy initiative. There are so many challenges to this. It is pretty complex already, as you can probably start imagining. So if you have ideas, come talk to us and help us make this better, right? If you're an optimist, you're an idealist, you're a skeptic, whoever you are, we need a little bit of all of you. So come talk to us and give us more ideas. Or again, if you have any other way that you want to contribute, you don't see it on the list here, just come talk to me. We'll find a way to get you all involved. That's all I had. And I want to open up to questions, comments, discussion, anything that you all might have.
All right, we have a comment from the audience.
Hi. So I've worked with, I think, folks from eight companies that do sort of contract work on Chromium in the past, and I'm curious, sort of for the teams that are, sort of on the receiving end of these contributions, doing code reviews, design reviews. Like, what is the process going to look like for sort of how we decide to sort of accept a contribution into the Chromium project, do sort of give code reviews, design reviews, all that kind of stuff.
Great question. Great question. And we expect that all of these contributions will go through Chromium exactly the way that they are today. So if you're a code reviewer and you feel like something's missing, if you feel it's because contributions are coming in through a certain direction, come talk to us and we'll figure it out. But we don't expect any of that to be different. We've been working with some of the vendors that are regulars in Chromium to also get advice on how this should go. So I'm not saying there won't be bumps, but there shouldn't be any drastic changes. Oh, I thought I saw a hand.
Another from the audience.
Thanks, Ruthie. Can you talk about the funding and transparency? To what extent is all the accounting going to be public?
Yeah, it's a great question. I should have actually included that in the talk. Everything will be fully public, fully transparent. And so everything starting from the project pipeline, the funding, how much each organization is contributing, none of this is planned to be kept private or confidential. And you should be able to find all of the information on Linux Foundation. Will have a way for you to access all of the information. But yes, it will be fully public and transparent. Thank you.
Shruti, did you have the slide with the links on it?
Yep.
People are asking in chat to see that again. Cool. Also, Yoav on the call. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey. So the list of current contributors, current funders, I guess, seems very much focused on browser vendors and embedders. Is this the intended audience, and is the goal more like infrastructure projects, or are we aiming for this to also fund features like web platform features, or a different, I guess, more focused on industry folks?
Yeah, there is no restriction at this time in terms of who can contribute to the fund. It's just the group of members who have come together at this time. In terms of the scope of projects, we do imagine that at least in the first couple of years, we will be focusing a lot on code health projects and on things like interop projects. That doesn't mean that that the fund or the scope needs to be restricted. It can be changed if everybody on the governing committee agrees to it, but this is the scope of the fund for today.
Okay, thanks.
You mentioned about sort of expectations around, what might a receiving team see and get code reviews and stuff like that. I'm wondering if there's guidance of how ambiguous the problem could be. Like, is this just for pretty fleshed, scoped out things, or can I say, hey, this is bad, but I don't know what the right answer is, and what's the level of expertise coming in to sort of problem solve in these areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the project pipeline, we're going to have different sections that help understand these problems a little bit. I would say that to start off with, we're probably going to start with problems that are pretty well scoped, but haven't been done yet, because we want to treat this as we'll kind of figure out the process as we go. And so to start off, that's how it's going to be. But the project pipeline can have more ambiguous projects as well. It's just that those may not be the ones that get funded right away. So there's going to be a section that talks about the size of the project, as well as ambiguity and complexity. And for the ones that are pretty ambiguous or complex, I would say we probably wouldn't take those on unless we have a mentoring team who's willing to take up the responsibility of actually working with the vendors very closely. So we'll make sure that there is a good matching there. And if not, we'll probably not start with those.
So the question I had, thank you for the presentation. I'm really excited about this. The question I had was just in terms of, even with Code Health and other projects, they do sometimes tend to be more complex if you're refactoring an entire code base. And we have different sections, different projects that roll into Chromium, and they have different guidelines on what they consider code health. So I'm mostly curious about who makes the prioritization decisions, and how, is it the governance committee or steering committee, and how you imagine that looking like in the future?
Yeah, great question. So right now, the way that we envision this is the steering committee is going to be the one who makes decisions around scope as well as priorities for the projects. And only if there are escalations, it would go up to the governing committee. And so all the organizations that will be funding this, we expect that we'll put some of the technical folks on the steering committee so they can help with this. I also want to say that we don't expect this to be a very solid list. Here are the 5 projects we're going to get done this year. And it's going to be very hard for us to do that just because we don't fully understand the demand in the ecosystem. We don't fully understand the available skill set in the workforce right now. And so we'll probably have a rolling project pipeline in there. And it may not be that our P0s are the ones that get done this year. It may be the P1s and the P2s that first get done. And so I just wanted to make it clear that we're going to mark priorities, but that doesn't mean those are the first ones that will get done. I hope that answers it.
Hello? Okay. Does the Linux Foundation have a mechanism to match independent contractors with this work?
Does. The Linux Foundation helps with a lot of different things. I probably will not be able to give a lot of details on it. They have ways in which we can pay them to do more in certain areas than what the baseline is. So in the baseline, they help with some of this. But if we do want a project manager who will actually do a lot more work in that aspect and do a lot more with finding vendors and matching them, they have the ability to do that. We would have to, start a separate contract with them. But that was one of the reasons we did like the Linux Foundation, is that they have a really good skill set and they're able to offer us with more services if we find ourselves in need of it.
I think this sort of gets to what I was asking about as well. Is in addition to code reviews, there's also sort of the vendor contract management part. When I've done work with folks that Google has hired to do work in Chromium, there's that whole sort of aspect of just setting contract description of work, that kind of thing. And so it sounds like that's handled by the steering committee and the Linux Foundation in this case, and not members of not Google or the sort of teams that are receiving the work, but it's kind of an extra. It's this group defining the scope of work and then that getting contributed to Chromium.
That's absolutely correct. Yes. So all of the contracting, working with the vendors, making payments once the work is done, all of that will be handled by this group.
All right. Thank you, Shruti.
Okay. Thank you all so much. It's so exciting to work on Chromium with all of you. And I'm very excited about this. Thank you all.